amigos y bienvenidos a este vuestro programa Dos gatos en tierra de perros. Un podcast de actualidad donde analizamos de manera fáctica y neutral las noticias más relevantes de la política y cultura norteamericana.
Hello, I'm Joe Magaja. Thanks again, friends, for being with me for another episode of Dos Gatos en Tierra de Perros. Today I have with me the co-host of the podcast Organized Money, Matt Stoller. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it a lot, for sure. There's so many things going on in the world right now. I think probably the first thing I'd like to touch on is the regime change in Syria. A lot of people are lauding this as a wonderful thing. Of course, Assad was a brutal dictator, but I think we know from past experience that, or if history is any indicator, that U.S.-backed regime changes don't necessarily end well, particularly in the Middle East. What are your thoughts on this, and what are your thoughts on the outlook going forward?
I don't know. That's not what I focus on.
Okay, sorry. No worries. What are your thoughts on what the transition into the
Sorry, I don't mean to be I focus on the problem of market power and corporate power and stuff. So
okay,
that's where I can be helpful if you have like questions about that. But I try to avoid going outside of that, just because then it just becomes my opinion, and everyone's opinion is whatever, like I don't have any particular insight. You could just so I don't want to like burden people with just random stuff I think.
No problem. I understand that. Well, in terms of market power and corporate power, one thing that's been in the news lately was the assassination of the CEO of that health company in New York, and that seems to have changed what a lot of put fear into a lot of CEOs. How do you think that will affect the market at all in terms of healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, their stock is already down. I mean, the healthcare stocks are down substantially. And today, on CNBC, Jim Cramer, was talking about it. So Wall Street guys know, they understand. There was an op-ed in the New York Times by the CEO of United Health Group, a guy named Andrew Whitty. So I think the reaction to the killing has really surprised people with a lot of capital, because they're like, wait a second, this was a brutal murder of a guy with a family, which is true. Why are people practically cheering for the killer? And I think that they didn't understand how angry people really are at the whole health system and how brutal they think it is. So that, I think, is going to that's going to it's waking people up in the political and economic elites, because they're like, oh, actually, this is really scary. So that's what it seems like to me. We could talk about like healthcare and why it's so messed up, if that's of interest to your audience.
I think it is. I mean, my audience is in the United States, but also in Europe and different areas of Latin America. But I think that it's something that worldwide everybody kind of knows that the U.S. healthcare system is problematic, and that a lot of people, it's been promised in so many elections that they would change the healthcare system in one way or another, and it's still, people are still going bankrupt over medical bills and
Yeah, I mean, so if the audience, I think what is important about U.S. healthcare for people all over the world is not the fact that Americans pay more and get less. It's that it reflects a certain philosophy of how to structure corporate power and an economy. And that philosophy is not isolated to America, right? Everyone knows that it is worldwide, and that a lot of the same frustrations that Americans have are shared all over the world. And it may not be in the healthcare sector. I think people are pretty annoyed at high medical prices in certain contexts. Like there are some cases on pharmaceuticals in Europe. I know people were upset about COVID vaccines and but broadly speaking, I think people see corporate power in the context of higher food prices, which they saw during COVID. They see it in the power of large technology firms, right? Everybody uses Google, right? Because you have to. And Google directs you where Google wants you to go. And usually Google's pretty good, but sometimes, you don't know if they're directing you to somewhere where they're getting paid for it, or they have all sorts of other sort of self-dealing that they're operating in. And behind Google, you have like, and in terms of food prices, you have massive conglomerates that trade food among different countries, like huge amounts of soybeans going to the US and from the US and to Brazil and from Brazil and so on and so forth. And they're very similar to large technology firms. They're middlemen. And, just like Google mediates between the websites and apps and stuff that you go to and the consumer who's doing the searching, that Google also has a bunch of other products, like they have YouTube, they have Gmail, they have Drive, they have 15 products with more than 2 billion users at this point. And, what you see with these large food processing or trading companies, it's the same thing. They're sitting in between the farmer and the consumer, or sometimes they're sitting in between the fertilizer producer or the seed producer and the farmer, right? So it's what we're dealing with, I think, worldwide, and it's particularly toxic in the US with healthcare, but it's worldwide, is the prevalence of these middlemen, right? It's the middleman problem, where you have market power in the hands of people who don't really do anything except manipulate that market power. And that, I think, that's a kind of global problem. It's an intellectual problem. It's a political problem. And I think what you're starting to see all over the world is a reaction to it. And that reaction can be, sometimes there's political reactions. There's a bunch of legal cases that are saying, hey, you guys are monopolies. You can't do what you're doing. That's very slow. Sometimes it's regulatory choices. I know Europe is has changed some of their rules around technology. Mexico, the Mexican competition authorities are getting more aggressive in certain areas. But sometimes it's political. Sometimes it's, someone elects a very extreme candidate who says the system isn't working and we're going to do all this other stuff. I think that's what you see with Trump, but you see these kinds of candidates all over the world, and they're not crazy to be saying this system doesn't work. There are reasons it doesn't particularly deliver for human beings. So, and I think this killing of a healthcare CEO, which was a big deal here, not because he killed a healthcare CEO, but because the country was basically saying, we don't like assassinations, but, the healthcare companies, they're doing killing too. So I think that's a reaction. That's a consequence of this sort of the dominance of these middlemen. Because the thing to understand, and I guess I'll finish here with U.S. healthcare, is that in a lot of countries, in most countries, you have some administrative functions, right, to go to the doctor, to deal with payments and so on and so forth. But those are relatively unimportant. Usually it's the government. Sometimes it's there's some private entities, but they're low profit or no profit. And it's an administrative function, and there's rationing. And so people have to wait a while to go to the doctor sometimes, or, but in the US, we have these very profitable, extremely large middlemen who boss around the doctors and boss around the patients and take huge amounts of money from everyone at every stage of the process, and don't really care if people live or die. And it's like really brutal. And it's like dealing with the most evil loan shark you can imagine, who has the power of life or death over you. But that is fundamentally because economists and healthcare policymakers and just sort of the intellectual class in general, and this is worldwide, but in the US, it's particularly bad with healthcare, has said, look, middlemen do a better job of running our society. Bankers do a better job of running our society than other kinds of people. And so we're going to entrust more political and economic power in their hands, because that will make a better world. They're wrong. It's a really flawed way of thinking about the world, but it is what we see, and it is kind of where we have been. It's changing, but that's the basic problem we're dealing with.
Yeah, I definitely see that, and I think that also, you mentioned the food supplies. There have been issues, particularly in Europe, with farms where it seems like the governments have been trying to shut down farms, basically, and well, they use the climate change as a reason for it, or other things, and the farmers are pushing back. But what do you think is really behind all of that?
The farmers mad about climate change stuff.
Well, no, the governments are a lot of governments are shutting down farms all over the
Well,
Western
I think
world.
that's largely like those protests. I don't know that much about those protests. I'm sure there's governments are doing some things that the farmers don't like, but I also think that a lot of that is financed by the fossil fuel industry. So I think it's kind of like not to say that they're wrong. I don't know, but I think it's kind of bullshit. I think it's kind of a lie. Like the farmers aren't, they're mad about other things, right? So for example, in England, I know that farmers are really upset about supermarkets giving them crappy prices for their products, right? You don't see the same media coverage around that, but there's been basically like rebellions among farmers in England over dominant supermarket chains. That to me makes a lot more sense than the climate change stuff because, most of the climate change things don't really, I mean, there are some issues with it, but largely what is happening is you have coercive market power that is being pressed on these people. And sometimes the climate change thing is happening, but people are saying you need to reduce carbon emissions, but it's an excuse for like say meat packers in this country or grain processors to take over land from farmers. And the farmers think it's some sort of green energy thing. And the meat packers or the processors or the other entities say it's a green energy thing so they can blame the environmentalists. But it's often not that. Often it's an attempt to seize someone's property. And they're just like the green energy or the environmental thing is just an excuse that everybody uses because they don't necessarily want to contest over what's really going on, which is just raw power.
Right, right. Yeah, I wonder also, I know in the United States and I think in Europe as well, a lot of these corporate farms are taking over, and I mean, it's been going on for a long time where they're pushing out the small farmer, and the quality of product is less, and but they can keep the prices low because so much of it is automated. And then the smaller farmers make their money through like farmers markets and that kind of thing where they can raise their prices, but it's still difficult across the country, and that also is reflected in the food that we eat and the health that we have because of it.
It's not that they are automated. A lot of the big farms are not automated. It's not that they use more technology or they're better at what they do. It's simply that they get better prices, right? That's all it is. It's like if you have, it's like Walmart, right? Walmart sells liquor or Costco sells liquor for less than like a small liquor store, right? Why? Is it because a smaller liquor store is just less efficient? That's what Walmart would want you to believe. We're so fancy. We have all these computer systems and whatever, right? But they also have to pay for private jets for their executives. They have huge overhead, right? What's really going on is they go to liquor suppliers and they say, we're Walmart. If you want to sell to Walmart, and you have to sell to Walmart because we're so big, you're going to give us better prices than everyone else. And they will complain about this, right? Like the smaller stores and even the bigger stores will say, we buy wholesale, which just means from their distributor, things like orange juice or liquor or eggs, must-have items, milk. We buy it wholesale for more than Walmart sells retail, right? So Walmart will sell milk for, I'm going to make up a price, $5 a gallon, okay? It's probably a little bit lower, but I'm just going to make that, okay. Say Albertsons, which is still a really big company, they can only get milk from their distributor wholesale for $6 a gallon. And then they have to mark it up to make their business work. Well, that you can't stay in, I mean, that's crazy, right? It's really hard to stay in business. It's nothing to do with efficiency. There's no, and like if you're a small store, like let's say you're just an independent, you're a guy that runs a gas station and you want to buy a gallon of milk, like you're totally screwed. You're going to get like, it's going to be $7, $8, $9 for a gallon. And that for sort of every product, right? So what is happening? And there are laws that prohibit this, right? You're not allowed to price gouge smaller stores. You have to give everybody the same price. There's a few like wrinkles in there, but like that's the gist of the laws, but they haven't been enforced for 40 years. They're starting to be enforced again, but that is why we have these dominant corporations in the economy. That's why farmers are getting screwed. It's basically like get big or get out. I mean, that's been a trend since the 1970s. It's a policy trend from Nixon's Secretary of Ag, which we've never moved away from that. But it really is important to recognize this is not about like farmers are just like smaller farmers are inefficient and bigger farmers are just more automated. No, it's really just bigger has more political and economic power. And that's a bad thing. That moves us because smaller farmers are more flexible. If you're growing one, set of crops and all of a sudden the market shifts, people don't, China shuts their market to soybeans because they're like, we want to mess with America. You can switch to different crops more easily if you're smaller. There are reasons why like during the pandemic, we had shortages of eggs, right? It's not that we couldn't grow enough eggs, it's that there were these large producers who were so focused on certain kinds of eggs that were used by commercial establishments, and then all the commercial establishments shut down because it was COVID, and they couldn't move back to normal eggs because they're so inflexible and so focused on that particular line of business. So I think that like we have to, and then you saw that with toilet paper, you saw it with a whole bunch of other things. You have to recognize that like there is we have to get back to a more resilient, more localized system of production. And that means we have to get these middlemen out of the way, and we have to start attacking the problem of raw bargaining power, which is what these dominant firms have been exploiting for so long.
Yes, totally. And I mean, one thing that I noticed during the very brief dock workers strike is that so much of our produce comes from abroad too, which is kind of not really necessary. We have such a huge country we have pretty much every fruit and vegetable that you can get, but we get it from Chile, we get it from the Caribbean, we get it from South America and even Africa. Why do we need to buy these products from abroad instead of growing them here?
Well, I mean, there's some products we have to get, like we can't grow coffee, right? Like there's certain tropical products where, Hawaii can't produce enough of it for the US. So we have to import, bananas and things like that. But you're broadly right. I mean, the US is a fantastically wonderful country in terms of our agricultural capacity. And there's just things like importing baby formula. Why are we importing baby formula? Like that's crazy. It requires chemicals and we can make here, and then dairy products. And we have fantastic dairy capacity, but it's way cheaper to make baby formula in Europe, in Ireland, which is just because they have they're focused on actually making and producing things. I think it was the last couple of years, the US is for the first time became a net food importer, which is really scary. It's a really dangerous thing for us to be a net food importer. And it's not, it gets more complicated, but like it's bad. I mean, this is a collapsing society. I mean, it's slow and we have a lot of time to fix it. It's not going to collapse tomorrow. But if you can't grow your own food, you're in trouble.
Yes, and you mentioned Walmart before. I remember years ago, Walmart was in the news a lot because it dominated. Well, so many industries depended on Walmart because it was so huge. I think the last television manufacturer in the United States went under basically because they lost their contract with Walmart. This was years and years ago. Because of course Walmart meets with everybody and they just go with the lowest bidder, but of course the quality product as well. So that's why they ended up importing things from different countries. But yeah, there are so many less factories here. Do you think we're ever going to go back to an age where where there are factories and where families can actually live on the income from working in a factory, like maybe back in the 60s or 70s?
I think we are moving back. I mean, you saw tremendous investments in factories under the Biden administration because they kept the Trump tariffs, but they also did a bunch of government investments in different industries. So you've seen, I think, record high investments in factories. I think that's going to continue. Whether those jobs are good jobs is a question of law and like labor relations. So I don't have an answer there. But I do think that the US, I think people are like, you got to understand the reason it got so bad is because it was a choice, right? I mean, I think there's sort of this view, oh, it's just like all these things just kind of happen, right? We just moved factories abroad because, it just was inevitable. But no, it was a choice. It was because economists thought that that was a good thing to move production offshore. So Janet Yellen once said, when a country sends you cheaper imports, which means that they're displacing your factories and your workers, you should send them a thank you note, right? So she said that, right? And she's changed her mind on that, or she said she's changed her mind on that. But that was the view of a lot of, of all of our political and economic elites, right? In the 80s and 90s and 2000s, they thought, well, this is great. We'll get cheaper products. Other countries will get richer. Everybody wins, right? And I think there's like a realization, no, that's not true. And so you're starting to see some shifts. Those shifts need to get a lot bigger. It's going to be, the people who really won from this trading arrangement were, the Chinese government, but also Wall Street. And so to get back to restructuring the economy around making things, around growing things, around some element of self-sufficiency, we're going to need to reduce the power of Wall Street. Because again, Wall Street is sort of the epitome of the middlemen. And, can we do that? I don't know. That's a political question.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we had we were preparing for a confrontation with China over Taiwan, and most of that was about computer chips because they dominate the market, which is kind of crazy that such a small country dominates something that the whole world is dependent on. I think that since then we've started making computer chips, but very small factories. I don't know. Do you know what the status is there?
Yeah, so we still make a lot of semiconductors. There's a lot of different parts of the semiconductor market. There's the chips that go into the iPhone, which are really advanced, and then there's chips that go into the toy that like speaks, right? And can be pretty, that could be pretty, would have been advanced maybe in the 90s, but today it's not. And then there's memory chips, and there's chips that are that like will sense that the air is getting hotter or cooler and push a button, or that they'll turn on a light. I think those are called like analog chips. There's a lot of different types of chips. We make a lot of chips that are kind of less advanced, right? We don't make the most advanced chips, right? And that is what we're trying to do, is bring some of that back. It's kind of working a little bit, but it's not working enough. And so we need to do more. But some of the things that I think the government has been doing over the last few years have started hitting that problem. And you are seeing a lot of investment in semiconductor fabricating plants in Arizona, in Ohio, in a number of places. We need to do more of that, though. That's a success, the CHIPS Act. There have been some significant problems with it, but I would say in general, it's been successful.
Yeah, that's good. That's positive. A lot of changes happened out here where I am in California, particularly in the entertainment industry. The film industry is kind of going downhill because of streaming and other things. But one of the big reasons for the strike this past year was artificial intelligence, which a lot of other people are fearing might take their jobs as well. Does it pose that much of a threat to industries and economies?
I don't know.
Okay.
I can't. I don't think anybody knows. I mean, Yeah, there's reasons to think it does. There's reasons to think it's kind of like overstated, but I'm not gonna, I'm not, it's just,
I appreciate that. I'd rather someone say I don't know than make something up, of course. Now, when Trump won, the markets surged, even the crypto markets. Is that kind of standard for presidential elections? And do you think that the markets are going to come back strong, or where do you think that's going?
I don't know. Again, it's a
Yeah.
prediction. I can't really.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, those kinds of things are basically just personal opinions because, of course, you can't predict the future, and we don't know what's going to happen. In terms of the changes in government, they're trying to slash a lot of agencies and cut waste. Um, do you think that'll be good for the economy, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what they're, I mean, generally speaking, my observation is I'm guessing they're gonna like say they're cutting waste and they're probably actually gonna cut things that are effective because, what these guys, look, what are billionaires? I don't mean to sound like very left wing, right? But one thing I've noted, this is a conclusion I came to after 5 years or so of dealing with some of these people. And it's going to sound really obvious, um, but I guess I am kind of dumb because I learned it. Billionaires really like money. It's why they're billionaires, right? They're greedy. I mean, and that's not like, oh, I don't like billionaires, blah, blah, blah. No, it's just like, look, these are the top earners in our society. They're the people who have the most money. They're kind of the Michael Jordan of getting money. And Michael Jordan is like super obsessive about everything, about competition and winning. It's all he cares about. And that is like, you like talk to like top athletes and they are obsessive about their craft and what they do. And they will do anything to win. And that's what you have to understand about, I think most, not all but most billionaires. I mean, I guess there's some athletes, professional athletes who are relatively relaxed about it, but very few. The same thing is true with billionaires. They really, really like money. And so I think what you will see is these people are going to do things that get them more money. That's what they will just sort of, that's their instinct. Even if they come in and they're like, oh, this, I don't care about money now. I'm taking this other publicly oriented role. I mean, if you've ever tried, like if you have a bad habit, right, and you try to kick that habit, it's hard, right? Your instincts are telling you, do the bad habit or do the thing that I've done my whole life. So I think I don't think they're gonna like really go after like waste. I think because that waste, one way to put it is waste, right? And we have a lot of waste in government. We have a lot of waste in public spending. We also have a lot of waste in all kind of across the board. But that waste to someone else is income, right? Because government spends $1 million and wastes it. That $1 million goes to someone. And if you take that money away from them, they're going to be mad, right? And most likely that $1 million, some amount of it ends up in the hands of some billionaire somewhere, right? Maybe even one of the billionaires who's in charge of cutting waste. So, what does that suggest? It suggests that I think they're going to vector their efforts to the people who are saying, no, that $1 million, you can't have it all, because there are people in government that do that. And they're going to say, actually, that person who's trying to get the government to spend less or to be more efficient or to stop some sort of scam, that is waste. And I think that's where they're going to focus is getting rid of the things that are functional.
Okay. Yeah, I think, well, you're definitely right that billionaires, they focus on getting money. That's their whole purpose. I think in a way, maybe that's why they're pushing to end the wars, like the war in Ukraine, partly because of the tragedy and death, but partly because it's terrible for business. Wars are bad for business unless you're in the arms industry. But there is also, there are a group of companies that are already preparing to rebuild Ukraine and things like that. Do you have any opinion on that?
You mean, well, about Ukraine? I don't know. I mean, I don't know why the U.S. is involved in you. It feels like shouldn't really be our problem. It's kind of Europe's problem. That's my general view. But again, I'm not good at foreign policy. I don't want to pretend like anybody should listen to me on that. That's just my instinct. I'm just like, why is my tax money going to Ukraine? Why is my tax money going to Israel? Why is my tax money why do we have troops in Western Africa? Like, this seems weird to me. I don't want to be I don't want my money going over there. It feels like There are plenty of problems over here that we need to deal with. But again, that's just my view. And again, it's my not particularly sophisticated view.
Right. But I do agree with you there. Partly, I think that a lot of it does have to do with business interests, though. Often when we go into a country, although we claim that it's to spread democracy, et cetera, it's often because they have something we want, either oil or minerals or different things that we can extract from the country. And those go back to our businesses or our business interests around the world. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think that's probably, there's definitely some merit to that, but I would also say that's too
Simplistic.
organized. I think there's a lot more, like, I think a lot of it is just like, we do it because we do it, right? I don't think there's like, so one of the things that's weird about our military is that if you are a general and you're running, we divide up the world into regions, or the military does, and they say, you're in charge of this region, you're in charge of that region, you're in charge of this other region. And what does that actually mean for these generals? Well, if everything is quiet in their region, then they don't get like any accolades, they don't get promoted. They just are like, it's just they just sort of sit there and don't have a lot to do. So they want to get involved in stuff, right? They want there to be action in their area, which is really messed up. First of all, I don't know why the US is like in charge of the world. Why don't the military think okay, we're in charge of the world? Maybe it's just like, it is fair to be like, all right, we should have someone paying attention to Africa and whatnot. It's not like a bad thing, but it is a bad thing when you say, all right, your job is, you're going to get promoted or you're going to get more attention if there's more conflict and stuff going on in your area, right? And you can call for more resources. Like, that's the opposite of the incentive you want. You want them to be like, look, the more relaxed things are in your area, the better for you, because then like we will be less likely to get involved in stuff. But that is the way the military is structured. So there's just this bureaucratic incentive for us to be busybodies all over the world. And so I don't even, it's like, look, the invasion of Iraq, you know, people said no blood for oil, right? Which I think was right. But the thing is that we didn't even get the oil, right? It wasn't like that was not, even the cynics, like if you're very cynical about it and you're like, America's this Machiavellian power that was trying to seize Middle Eastern oil reserves, it didn't work, right? The US, it really was just, it was worse than that. It was just kind of like the military contractors are just preying on the US defense budget, right? It's just allows them to prey on Americans, right? I mean, we incidentally also killed a lot of Iraqis and destroyed Iraq and destabilized the Middle East and did all sorts of other terrible things. But the actual profits didn't come from Iraqi oil.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're running out of time. I have one last question for you, fairly generic, and if you don't really have an answer, that's fine. But you know, we've been in hyper or a very high rate of inflation. The country's kind of been struggling. Are you optimistic about the economy changing for the better, or pessimistic, or are you in a wait and see kind of mode at this point?
I think I mean, I'm just guessing here, but I would say that I think we are going to see some good things happen in certain areas. I think you're going to see more certain aspects of healthcare will improve because we'll make better policy. Other aspects are going to get lost a lot worse. But I think in general, what we will see in the Trump era is a much more speculative economy. There's going to be a lot more emphasis on finance, on stock prices, on cryptocurrencies, on fundamentally unproductive activity, and you know, and just gambling with other people's money. And that always ends badly, but it's fun in the interim before it ends badly. So I think it'll be like a raucous party where people are not actually doing anything useful, and there'll be a lot of gambling. It'll be bad from my perspective, because I'm kind of puritanical about that kind of thing. But it'll end in tears. But in the meantime, it'll be fun for certain people.
Okay. Well, thanks again so much for being on. And where can people find your work and your podcast?
Right. So I am the co-host of a podcast called Organized Money, where we look at different businesses that are trying to compete in this economy and look at monopolies and how to compete against them. And then I also write a newsletter called thebignewsletter.com, in which I focus on the politics of monopoly power and finance. And I'm also on Twitter, but you shouldn't be on Twitter because it's terrible.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again. And I hope to talk to you again sometime. And thank you to all our listeners. And until next time.